So, welcome to the latest installment of No Appointment Necessary. Today, we've got Adam Poulter from Foundations Physio. I think one of our first neuro physios as a marketing client for HMDG. And I do remember it was actually quite important because until I started working with neurophysios, I didn't realize that actually marketing for neurophysios is completely different because it's one of the only sectors, I think, where you are marketing to three different groups of people. You've got the case managers. I'd be interested, actually. I know lots of people are always asking, like, how do I get in with case managers? That's probably a question we can ask. But you've got the case managers, you've got the patients, and it's probably rarely patients with some conditions, but then you have the caregivers as well. So I do remember going, oh my God, this is really interesting. And it's much more interesting than just marketing directly to patients. So I do remember that. Adam, you own Foundations Physio, but you also literally just said to me, you're more of a physio than you are a director or CEO.
No, I still work very clinically. I still probably work nearly 5 days a week clinically because I enjoy it and because the service needs it. And I think we structured our service around that. So we have a support team, like an administrative team, and a business team outside of that, so that they can sort of take.
That's an interesting question because I think there's a trend at the moment for people who own businesses to remove themselves clinically and run the business.
Mm.
That always makes me wonder whether that's the best move. And I'm interested, because you just mentioned support services. You are an incredibly successful clinic. How have you managed to stay clinical and yet still have such a successful business?
I think we haven't tried to, we've scaled very organically. Like, we haven't taken any sort of investment. We have outsourced services that we know we're good at what we're good at. And I think that's really important, is to realize what you're good at. And we've used services like HMDG, but also like other, we outsource other services because they're good at it. They're set up for it. You do a miles better job than we would do trying to do the same thing ourselves. I think there's an element of making a decision of saying, well, I'm a clinician first and foremost, and always have been for the last over 15 years. Part of the reason the business is successful on a clinical level. Why would I change that skill set when I can bring in people who have other skill sets and use them for that? They will do far better than me trying to learn that and then be clinical still, because there's no one else to head up the clinical side of things unless I pass that on to the rest of the team. So for me, it made more sense. But I think it depends on your service. Like, I don't know, Neuro's a very complex patient group that requires quite a lot of support management. You mentioned about the families and also supporting them. It's not just the individuals you're working with. Whereas I think perhaps an MSK clinic is slightly different in that you are pretty much there for the patient. So it's maybe different.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because as I say, there's this huge trend, and much of the time I disagree with it, particularly when you see a clinician who's bringing in 60% of the revenue, and then someone says to them, you've got to get out of clinical work and you've got to jump into running the business. And so they hire a load of new physios or whatever, and suddenly revenue nosedives. And you're like, yeah, that's going to happen. And that's great. Take yourself out of clinical work. You've really got to plan and prep for that. I think it's a year to 2 years of really thinking that through. Anyway, it's just interesting to hear someone who is running something successful saying that they can still work clinically and still make the business work. I've got a load of questions, which I think will be really interesting. But before we do, one of the things I've always enjoyed, and we've had lots and lots of chats, is you've told me about lots of different things that you've done that are quite innovative. I just want to, let's look at some of those and talk about some of those things that you've done within the business, whether that's clinically or not, that have been quite innovative and a little bit different to others. Can you name a few and just talk us through?
I think a lot of it, we've just tried different things and not been afraid to try it. So I think probably the most recent version was, we have a member of the team who is martial arts trained, for example, and he happens to work with his boxing gym. So we decided that we would partner up with his boxing gym and he would run a martial arts class for Neuro, which is high level. You or I would struggle with this class. This is like a very, very high level. It's press ups, it's burpees, it's bag work. For neuro conditions. We ran that as a trial. We gave all our patients free access for 3 months. They came once a week for 3 months, and on the proviso, we would take outcome measures so that we could see if it was viable, for example. And this is martial arts. There's a lot of work around boxing specifically, but there's nothing really around the martial arts. I think the kicking is a really important part of it for single leg stand and stuff. So we looked at that. We did some outcome measures. We got roughly a 15% improvement across the board over 10 sessions, which was amazing for the patients that we had there, and some really great functional improvements. So we've now expanded that and run that.
Yeah, I suppose also I'm a big fan of when I hear people gamifying rehab in some way. And I suppose you're gamifying it by doing it through martial
Well,
arts.
it's sport.
Fun.
It's sport. It's there's all sorts of accessible climbing and accessible sport, and it's getting people outside of clinical work. And we're very non-clinical in that sense. We're probably slightly different in that we're probably a bit more functional and a bit more let's get you out and about. We do gamify stuff, like you were saying. We worked quite closely with VR for upper limb and subsequently for their sort of lower limb module that they've now put on the program to look at gamifying it in a bit more detail for people, and also look at technology because we're community based that they can take home that isn't going to cost them the earth from that point of view.
I remember years ago, I spoke to a guy called Guillaume from a company called Neuro, I think.
Yeah, we
He had an amazing story. I think, if I remember rightly, his uncle had had a stroke, or had, I believe it was a stroke or two. He found it really difficult to get decent care. I believe it was in Spain. And then, I hope I'm telling the story right, but it's from as I remember. And then he did a degree in maybe neuroscience, then a degree in engineering, and then with this really cool, I wouldn't call it a toy, but product, Neurophenix.
Yeah, and it was the Neuro ball because we met with him as well, and it was the Neuro ball, and it was a sort of for hand and upper limb function, really.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't know what's happened to that. I haven't really seen it around.
I will have to get in touch with him because I did see recently he had got some more funding. I think they're still doing quite well. It's really interesting. There are, and we'll get onto the tech a little bit later, but I think there's quite a lot of innovation within Neuro with tech and a lot of bullshit too. And we'll get into that a little bit later. What about any other things that you're doing or that you have done that are kind of a little bit more innovative and different?
I suppose we've always tried at the heart of our service to try and keep it as accessible as possible. And I know we were touching on that. So I think one of the things that we do really well is locally, and I think part of the reason for our success is we keep things accessible through partnerships with charities and through partnerships with sort of care providers. So we're actually, collaboratively working on quite a significant level to be able to keep people accessing our service. And we're probably, I would say that 90% of the people that access our service self-fund. So you were speaking to me, you mentioned about case management side of things. We actually don't do loads of that. And having been to a few conferences, I think we're one of the only neuro services that don't have, that level of case management. I think most of them have around 70-80% case management.
I think that actually speaks a lot to your brand and what you're doing. Because I think, and I not that I want to criticize neuro clinics who are using case management a lot, because I think there's some fantastic ones doing that. But I think it's much easier to do it that way than, I think, build that local kind of collaboration with, as you say, care homes or whatever. It actually is really, really difficult. And I think you really have to build a great brand to be able to do that.
And we put a lot of effort into working with those local services, whether that is care agencies or anything else. And I think outside of that, the innovative side of things actually sometimes is like the culture and how you operate within your community and providing that home feel community to people. And it's about your priorities as a service. And I think sometimes it's about why, going backwards, it's about why you started in the first place and keeping very true to that. I think lots of people probably get sidelined on a finance level, or, you get really sucked into that business side of things, and actually keeping the reasons that you started the service prevalent is really important.
Do you do that? So we've had the same issue, right? Where your business grows and suddenly money becomes the overriding thing. And for us, it's very difficult to forget why we first did what we did, because you're constantly coming across small healthcare business owners that are struggling, that have been treated badly by other agencies or businesses. And it's actually really easy every day to be grounded, and you have someone who says, I don't know what to do. And so it's easy for us. Is that similar to you, or how do you do it?
I think a lot of it has been down to appropriate partnerships with people. Before we met you guys, for example, we went through about 3 different marketing agencies. And I think I came to you and said, I've just had a nightmare. And I think some of it is about appropriate collaborative partnerships in order to keep things flowing. And I think some of it is also about realizing that some of the work that you're going to be doing is not going to be monetized. It is going to be favors and support. And I've been out to 2 self-employed physios who I know locally recently, and I've just done a joint session with them with one of their patients, as free of charge, because they don't have anybody to support them. They don't have that clinical support.
Do you see that as a strategy? Because again, it's something that we do a lot of, which is helping people for free. I don't want to call it for free, because ultimately for us, we're gaining something in the long run, whether brand or whatever. But is it a bit of a strategy of yours to offer a lot of help, and support, not monetizing it and reaping the rewards afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's about building a community. I think you try not to do it with sort of that reward structure in mind. I think it's very hard because I don't think anyone does things sort of totally altruistically today from that point of view. But I think, but I do think that as best as you can, I think if I was in their position, then it would be great if I'd had somebody like that could do that. And I think, I've spent the last 10 years building a business and I've had not really many people that have given me that support. I've had to go and find it. And I think that being able to offer that to people who are starting their journey is really important. And I think, like the HMD Connect stuff's brilliant. I think it's really helpful for a lot of people.
No, I think it's important. And I've said before, it's very difficult in this industry and healthcare in general. Everyone's a silo and an island, and they don't want to share and they don't want to collaborate with others, and they're always very scared of giving other people information. And I think people are always quite scared of asking for it because they're going to know. And I saw a brilliant Steve Jobs interview once. He was about 12 years old, and this are the days where you had a yellow pages, and he called the chairman of Dell and said, I've got this project and I need some of your bits and bobs from Dell. And the chairman said, yeah, absolutely. I'll send them out to you. And he said, you're a clever little one. When you graduate, come and give me a call and I'll give you a job. And Steve Jobs said, no one's ever said no when you've asked nicely. And I found that actually, no one ever says no. If you ask nicely and you give a good reason, and it would be nice if there was more collaboration and people did ask more for help more from other people. We something that's really pissed me off over the years is people started treating me as a guru, and I hated that because I know a lot about very specific things. But I've never stepped foot in a clinic other than being a patient or being a quick visitor. I don't know how to run things, and that's why we introduced Connect, because I want the people like you and others who have been there and done it. I want them to be the gurus, them to be the ones advising other people rather than, asking me what the best way of creating a patient journey is.
Well, it depends there's so many variables. I think even within that, even with the guru setting, like I'm like by no means a guru, like I'm still learning. And ultimately I would never consider myself in a position to give people that level of advice without having a very in-depth understanding of what they're actually doing, like their local services, what they like, where are their partnerships, where are their connections, like what, it's everyone's business is so individual. I think at some point it's just about having the time to sit down and understand it. Like, what's your business?
Yeah, and I think everyone's a slightly different business owner as well, and they have different needs. Really need a lot of emotional support, and others don't need any emotional support. They just need help with metrics and numbers and understanding how to run a business in that sense. But it is interesting. I do hope for the future that people are more collaborative in the industry and help a little bit more.
It's becoming a buzzword of mine. A really big buzzword is collaboration, because it needs to happen. It's come across all of the conferences. It's now in like the NHS 10-year plan.
Yeah.
So it's like, like we should be collaborating across sectors, not even just across, we should be collaborating because you have more power as a group.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, this disconnect between GPs and physios and whether neuro or not, and consultants, and how there's always this battle. It just seems crazy to me. Really, there should be, and maybe this exists somewhere, but some kind of shop front where you all put yourselves together and you can all communicate and send people in the right direction. If you've got as an MSK clinician, you've got a patient that's 100 kilos overweight with a knee problem, you probably need to go and find a nutritionist, right? Or a personal trainer or something. And I think it would be really nice if there were more relationships, but I think ultimately we're still in a bit of a situation where people are worried about holding on to money.
Yeah, but there's such greater value in saying to your patient, and if you put your patient at the center, like truly put your patient at the center of your care, like we are not set up to deliver MSK services. We don't. We pass them on to very local MSK services. We do what we're good at because that's the service spec that we're set up for, and they're the people we've recruited. Right, and neuro physios. And I think when you're looking at it from a purely financial level, there's a feeling that you might just go, well, I'm just going to run this service and this service and this service, and we're just going to have loads of different services, all of which have like small amounts of patients coming through them that add up to this sort of cumulative effect. And I think sometimes being a generalist isn't always the best option for your patient and possibly for your clinic. And actually having that network of services is probably better in the sort of long run. The amount of neuro patients I have that have MSK problems, because there's comorbidities and vice versa.
I think it's important. And I think patients respect that. And I do the same thing. If someone says, I really need an accountant, well, there's an accountancy firm. Yeah, I need a whatever the case may be. I will push people in the right direction, and I think having that network makes your business incredibly valuable because number one, they know that. Well, no. So I was accused recently of taking money from people for recommendations, which, by the way, I've never done, even though people offer me money all the time. But they know that if I recommend a product or a service or a person, that it's genuine because I believe I believe in that product or that person, and it makes us quite valuable actually to people because they know they can trust our opinion. Whereas if we just say, oh yeah, we can do this and we can do that, we can't. You can't do everything.
It's enough just to run a good service within one particular aspect of physiotherapy, right? Like I think when you start to branch out, it's very hard to put all that in and run the excellent service that you want to, which I think most physicians want to. I think they do. Like I think it's just time.
I had a lot of questions, which are a bit more neuro related, but I think will be really interesting because I think they'll cross over to a few different areas. But first one was, and this came up to my head because Hannah, my fiance and MD of HMDG, is a NACPAT physio. And I thought to myself, if she wants to treat a hamster and call herself a veterinary physio or a animal vet or physio or whatever, she's got to go on a postgrad course. She's got to pay a lot of money, and there are certain standards. I find it crazy that any physio tomorrow could call themselves a neurophysio and start treating a child with a stroke. Uh, should First of all, should neurophysio be a protected title? And then should there be postgraduate standards within that?
I think it's an interesting question. I think so there are postgrad courses you can go on. So you can do an MSc in neurophysio, for example. I think a lot of what happens with physio and with the HCPC really comes down to competency and being able to demonstrate your competency. When you look at it in depth, competency is a number of things, right? It's experiential. It is documented often through reflective practice or whatever else. And it is through things like external courses. They're probably the main real ways in which you can demonstrate your competency. And the HCPC, they probably audit every couple of years. So you sometimes get called, sometimes don't. There's no real there's not real frequency to you being audited around your competency. But I do think that if you had a problem, that insurers would want to see your competency. So I suppose the insurance side of things also should mitigate some of that. And even within the CSP insurance, there's one of the professional standards is working within your scope of practice. I think you can call yourself a neurophysio. I do think that sometimes patients, and with the rise, with Google and AI and stuff now, I think you can quite quickly get found out if you're not, well trained as a neurophysio, because patients are experts. They're experts in their conditions. They will know if the advice you're not giving them is incorrect because it is everywhere on the internet. You can access a lot of information now.
Let's go back to that though, because I think if that were the case and they're all being audited, and I don't think it's particularly difficult to throw a bit of CPT together and say, look what I've done.
No.
Then we would have an incredible pool of neurophysio clinics with great neurophysios, which I don't think is the case. I think that there is definitely a problem with standards. I think there is, although you tell me if I'm wrong, but I think there is an issue with standards. I think that mediocrity is quite rife. And that may be, I don't know, but it may be to do with just the amount of staff shortages there are. So it becomes more acceptable, for example.
Yeah, I think professional standards are a really difficult one because they're a difficult one to monitor. And I think perhaps your perspective is that you're obviously getting these, you see a lot of that within your marketing company and you sort of hear a lot of that, right? And I think that's natural. I think, for example, I was looking back, anyone can set up their own private clinic, like from graduation if they really want to, which I think is, possibly needs some sort of regulation and perhaps, there's some work to be done around the private sector being slightly more regulated. I think most people go into the NHS and there should be, things like in-service training and external courses and regular CPD opportunities. And that should be evidence as an employer. So I think it's also incumbent on, for me, if someone said to me, what do you do for your team? You would be able to give a list of like the in-service trainings we run and the external courses we've all sorted out and the peer reviews and all of those things. So I think it also it would be interesting because I think there's an incumbency there on the employer and the clinic to ensure that they're maintaining their standards.
And there is, and I think maybe both of our data is skewed a little bit because you are obviously surrounded by very, very good clinicians and private practice owners, whereas I will see an awful lot of nonsense going on. And I suppose one of the reasons it sort of bothers me a little bit is that the financial rewards within neurophysio are so extreme and so high compared to MSK or other things, that I do wonder whether there's a level of exploitation going on, or people just accept slightly lower standards because they're chasing the pound sign.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I think there's a perception that perhaps the rewards are higher, but I don't, like, as a clinic, I don't feel that.
They are.
I'm sure they are. I don't work in the MSK sphere, as I said. And as I said to you, we withdrew from the big insurers because they were, absolutely hammering people's prices. I think there's maybe perhaps the MSK sector, because it's so competitive, maybe that this is sort of price battle. There aren't that many really good neuro clinics around still.
I think one of a few of the reasons we're doing this survey, the private practice barometer, so we can find out more. But I think like the average clinic has got $5,000 in its bank account. If you turn over more than 500,000, you're in the top 1% of clinics in the country on the MSK side. And I think that comes down to on the neuro side, your lifetime value of a patient is incredibly, particularly if they have Alzheimer's and you just get them in every day. I made that joke to a physio once who didn't laugh. I thought it was quite funny. But your retention rates are high. In fact, I don't think any neurophysio has ever gone, oh, how do we improve retention? It's just not even a discussion or a topic, right? So lifetime value of patients is incredibly high. Your average fees are much, much higher than your average 50 quid for a physio appointment. And so when you combine those things, generally, and not all, but generally, neuro clinics are just way more profitable, way more financially successful, let's say, than your average MSK clinic.
I think there's probably a little stability and a bit less volatility in terms of the market, certainly from that point of view.
That's another good point. I think you don't have the ups and downs in your cash flow. You are not having to spend as much in terms of chasing new patients every 5 minutes, and you're not on that hamster wheel. And from what we can see and what I've seen, I mean, it always surprises me when a neurophysio comes on and says, I'm really struggling to make money. It's like, mind blowing. It's a bit like a pod that says, I'm not making money. It's like, you're like gold dust. There are very few around, very few of you around, really good ones around. And again, you treat the right conditions, you've got patients there for an awful long time. So I think the financial rewards are far, far higher. I mean, I'm not going to mention who, but I know one clinic who started offering neuro because they were able to double their fee. They were paying their physios an appointment fee or a fee per appointment. We're able to just add 50 quid on and suddenly make an extra. Now, that's obviously not why you should be offering neuro physio.
No.
But you get.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think I agree with you in that the fees are higher. I think the additional work that comes in to neuro, I think is, my neuro assessment might take me an hour for the appointment, but it might take me 2 further hours, probably unpaid, to go through that. I probably haven't completed an assessment in an hour. I think, there's a lot of investment in terms of the community and the time and the family side of things that you just don't do with the MSK stuff. If you wanted to, you could have 14 patients in a day. We'd be lucky to get 5. So,
sure, but those 5 patients are worth £5,000 each over a set amount.
They're regular patients, but I think a successful MSK clinic, if they're full all the time, is the same. I don't think there's much different.
It is, because each patient, they have to go out and find a new every single month.
Yeah. I think each has their challenges, but I don't think it's as and I think that's perhaps the perception, and the problem I have with the perception of neuro, and perhaps why MSK clinics are going into neuro, is that they think that it's this pure like golden goose. And actually, if you're doing a good job, it's not. I think it's difficult to say that, and part of me is pushing back on it, because there's a perception in the neuro world that people that move into private practice are doing it for financial reasons, and actually, we're not.
What I would say actually is that if you think about, like you just mentioned, and you are doing massively respectful and doing things the right way, and you're doing lots of things, let's call them free. But actually, it's not. It's marketing. It's marketing in its own right. If you're seeing my grandfather and you're spending time with me and you're educating me and communicating with me, and that in itself is marketing. Because if that patient is worth, let's just say, £5,000, then yes, you're up fronting a bit of work, you're spending a bit of extra time, but it is a marketing cost. It's almost an acquisition and retention cost. Whereas an MSK clinic, their average patient is worth £250. They have to find 50 new patients every month just to survive. And so their fee is actually having to put more money into marketing, having to put more money into all sorts of things just to generate those appointments. And, it's the old Pareto principle, right? Those retained patients are always going to make most of the money rather than finding new ones all the time.
Mm. It'd be interesting to do a comparison, I think, because I think a lot of it's, and actually, again, spending the extra time with patients and families for us is not intention. Intention is a bit with marketing. And I think actually the intention is to do a good job rather than anything else. And I think if you do a good job for your patient, you get the right outcomes. Yes, on a marketing level, from a marketing person, it is positive, but that's not the intention.
But
Interesting.
that is the secret of incredible marketing. You're doing something because you're providing an incredible experience. It doesn't matter what it is, right? It could be a shop, it could be anything. You're providing a great experience, and that's always the best marketing. And normally it's unintentioned. It's not that someone's thinking we should do X and that's going to make us more money in the long run. They're doing it because they want to do a brilliant job. But that is always the best marketing. It's very difficult to kind of reverse engineer marketing and go, okay, these guys are shit. It's like we need to make them look better and so on. So it is I've been doing a lot of thinking on this recently. I think we're going to do a fair amount of content on it, which is that customer experience, providing great service, which allows you, number one, to charge an awful lot more, which retains clients much more easily, which gives you great word of mouth and also brand. I'll give you an example of I bought something in a really nice shop not so long ago, and I went back in and I said, oh, there's a little issue with this thing. And he said, done. They fixed it in like 2 seconds, and they said, we're so sorry. It wasn't even a question of, oh, well, show me a receipt or when did you buy it? It was just, we will fix that for you. And so I then tell lots of people about that. I will always be a customer of theirs. It's just, it's so important to provide that. I know you may not be doing it for that reason, but it is still the most effective form of marketing.
Yeah, and you're right on that. I think it all goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about the why. Why did you set it up? Like, why did you do it? And I think, why are you starting that new service? Is it financially driven? What is it? And in some aspects, there are reasons why you might financially make that decision, but your why has to be really important because that is what you're achieving by staying true to your why. Right?
So that brings us on to an interesting one because it's again sort of related to some extent. You know that there are, and when you spoke to this where you don't deal with insurance companies an awful lot, so this is self-funded patients and families. When a patient comes to you, you know that they're going to potentially spend a huge amount of money, often something that isn't necessarily affordable. How do you deal with that, just personally? Cool.
I think it was, I think it is a challenge. I think one of the conversations is we always have is that, we are very clear and upfront about what pricing, et cetera, before people even book an appointment, which you obviously should be. And we have that conversation on the phone as part of our process. Most patients will have an expectation already about what they can afford in terms of sessions. So often we're guided by them. I think the skill in getting good outcomes when you're dealing with people that maybe are only having one session a week, one a month, one every 2 weeks. And I would say the majority of our patients are only having like maximum one a week, which is an hour a week, is how you fill their time in between in terms of their rehabilitation. There are patients that spend a lot of money, often patients who have the money to spend, but for the vast majority, that's not the case. I totally agree with you. And so my job and part of my job is to try and keep things as accessible as possible and work within their budget rather than them. Yes, there's my clinical recommendations. And if you gave me anyone with a stroke, I would want them in an inpatient rehab unit for 3 months and we would do wonders with them, right? But that doesn't work. That doesn't work as a model. It's impossible for people to fund that. So you have to think about using things like tech and, proper exercise planning and goal setting and motivational techniques. And often they're motivated anyway because they're financially paying. So, you tend to only get people who are really motivated to improve generally, because it's a substantial amount of money to be putting forward for people. So I think we balance it well with that. And then working with charities, we have a variety of like different services. So, charities subsidize some of our exercise classes, for example.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, Parkinson's UK, they probably subsidize the cost for each member of 65% of the value of each class per head.
Amazing.
Every week. And we take 70 people through those classes. Every week. We work quite closely with charities to subsidize, and they actually subsidize the initial assessment as well. So we go and assess them before. So the model that we have is around collaborative working. We collaboratively work with the NHS, and we sometimes forcibly get them involved when they're potentially discharging. And we say, no, like we will drop off a session here for you to add in a session or whatever. Having private physio does not, negate the need for you to come in. Like you should still be coming in just because they've got private physio.
Did you reach out to the charities or were they reaching out to you? How did that work?
A bit of both. We had our Parkinson's referral actually came from a colleague of mine who runs a different clinic, who couldn't fulfill it. Who's another private service that we in good contact with, which was so we get those contracts partly through looking for them, but I think also partly just locally, that reputation and that sort of builds from there, and that outreach work that we do. So yes, I do my best to reduce costs as much as possible for people, which sounds like a strange way to do things, but because most of our people are self-paid, it's different. If a case management comes to me and says, right, what can you do? Then I can give them advice on what we can do. And then it's a conversation about, what's appropriate, what are you able to fund here? And that's a whole different conversation. At the same time, we're keen on keeping our services accessible and also not. One of the themes that came out of the brain injury conference I went to on Friday for Headway was the haves and the have-nots. So there's people that have a brain injury and have case management because it was an accident, but there are a load of people that don't. And it's, you see these other guys that have got this amazing funding and they're accessing exoskeletons and all of these things, right? And then you've got everybody else. And my passion has always been for the everybody else almost. That's what, we've tried our best to do that within what's viable for the service.
Yeah, it must be really difficult. It just makes me think of being in an A&E in America and seeing one patient come in with great insurance. And the next, you're like, choose which finger you want to keep. Kind of crazy. I saw that on the show once. But yeah, it must be quite difficult at times because I suppose it happens in all areas of healthcare, doesn't it? I can afford to go and get a private scan and get whatever I need, and others can't. But you're at the sharp end of it, and you see that, and it must be tough at times. It must be tempting also to now. Of course, you've got some of the stuff you do, but it must also be quite tempting just to go, you know what, I'm going to treat you for free, even if it's commercially completely inappropriate.
Yeah, it is. It's often I'm probably not your typical. I'm probably not the best clinic owner that I think commercially is always a secondary thought for me, which I'm getting better at it not being that because it's not always been smooth sailing when I've done that. So I've got a lot better at that, which is good. But it is a balance, and I think
if you don't, I think you could be very commercial by not being commercial. I'll give you an example. During COVID, when we were still a tiny little company, I remember I was really worried about these clinics because we deal with a lot of small clinics and it's not like we're dealing with multinationals here. And I said to Hannah, and I said, look, we're going to send out an email. I'm going to send out an email that says, don't take the piss, but if you can't afford to pay us and you're really struggling, let us know. I will stop the payments. And you can start, we're going to keep going with the service, but you can start up again when you're ready. It's about 5-6 clinic owners took up on that, and I got some amazing things like no one's treating us in this way, everyone's trying to get every last penny, thank you so much. It was probably, and I didn't mean it like this, but it was probably the best marketing we'd ever done, because once COVID was over, oh my god, they are, and to this day they're still referring people to us, like these guys, they're not just out for your money. And it was brilliant marketing. And again, it's an example of not being commercial but being commercial, if you like.
I remember the email. I remember the email because I very much appreciated it at the time. I don't think we took off on it in the end, but it was a good time for everybody. Yeah,
but I think it's important. You've got to treat people in the right way. I had another clinic owner who had spent 12 grand on. I've got to be careful, and spent a lot of money on something else, and they said, look, my business is going under, I don't know what to do. So we did everything for free, because that poor person was basically screwed. And again, fantastic marketing. I sound like I'm not exploiting it, because genuinely we all want to just help people. Good people want to help good people, and but I do think it again is the best form of marketing. See, my situations are kind of a bit easier than someone who's got MS or Parkinson's, who you're just looking at thinking, oh, I wish I could do so much more for. That must be so difficult sometimes.
It is, but I think it's all about innovation, right? I think you can, it's like the VR headsets we were talking about. Like, you send someone home with that.
Let's get into. I remember you mentioned, this is a couple of years ago now, you mentioned what you were doing with VR.
Yeah, I mean, we got approached this Neuro, the company that we've been working with, and we work to help them sort of, along with a load of other clinics, but we work to help them develop some of their games and software and stuff to be relevant for neuro rehab, specifically stroke. We did a few projects with them, and they've recently, we just helped them with their lower limb module to sort of release that as well. The reason that we like it is we're a community-based service. Yes, we have a clinic, but actually we could send people home with that and use that as an adjunct to physiotherapy. And they're not using it to replace physiotherapy, but what they are doing is saying, you can take this home and do your physio as prescribed intensively. So what it's some of these tech companies are thinking, and I think rightly so, is they're thinking about how can we add intensity at home? How can we send people home with stuff, people that maybe can't get out, people that don't want to go to a gym because the gym's very intimidating for people with a disability? How can we get them to do more? And I think a lot of it comes down to, like, I think good tech gets people moving more. And I think that's the ultimate thing, is that, like, does it do that? And secondly, is it plug and play? Is it a faff to use? Because if it is, no one's going to use it.
Yeah, I think tech in healthcare is incredibly important, whether it's with wearables. I genuinely believe the Apple Watch has saved many millions of lives. If nothing, then it just tells people that, they got to do a little bit more exercise, a bit more walking or whatever. And I think the right tech is incredible and can be really, really useful. And it's interesting because I think I think you get it in pod as well, but I think Neuro is one of those areas that's using tech more so than any other sort of physio specialism.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tech is in neuro is more appropriate. I think the tech in neuro is mostly developed with the patient in mind. I do think it's wildly expensive, but I do think that it is at least developed with the patient and therapists in mind, and they are doing a lot of consultation around the development of those products. I don't necessarily think all of them are there yet. I think there's a really heavy reliance on data, and you may or may not disagree with me with this because you're, quite data driven as an individual, but I don't find it particularly meaningful for the patient. And I think the reporting of the data needs to be better so that it is meaningful for the patient. And I think that's where the disconnect comes in. And as a clinician, I don't actually have that much time to be sitting down and looking at reams and reams of data. You can save it, you can keep it, you can have a quick glance at it, but actually, I'm still fairly reliant on what I'm seeing in front of me, within the session, rather than, I think biofeedback and data that's in real time is more helpful in some ways.
Yeah, I suppose AI could come in here a little bit though, couldn't it? If you create a good template to interpret the data and make it patient friendly, because that's always the issue is data and giving it to a client and then saying, there you go. And you're like, I don't know what this means or how it impacts anything. But I think a good bit of AI to kind of repackage it could be quite good.
Yeah. So how does it relate to your goals? Like, there should be some goal setting stuff in there that you can be inputting before, so you can actually relate what's happening to your goals. Because actually, goals are set on a functional level, and data is not on a functional level, is it? It's different.
I think with a lot of the tech companies, it feels to me that many of the MSK tech and health tech companies often are run with money in mind. And it feels to me that a lot of the products in neuro, and you sort of think yourself, are sort of with the patient in mind, and then it makes the money. Do you think I'm right?
I do. I do think that there's a lot of, because of the R&D that has to go into all the research and development that has to go into all these things. Like, I think the cost base for most clinics, I find that most tech for neuro is still pretty inaccessible. Even like, I don't know, a Bioness FES for foot drop, which is better than, works better than some of the more basic models. That's still like 5K if you want to purchase that. And like, for most people, that's out of reach. I think it's not necessarily designed for the mass market. And the other problem I have is that a lot of the bigger tech is designed on people coming to you to use it. It's like a gym base. It's like a more fancy bit of gym equipment. Do you know what I mean? Whereas actually, so it's great for intensity, but for 90% of the population, that's not happening. The reason we've invested in things like VR and we've got FES kits and stuff like that is, and, Blaze pods we use loads, because you can take them out and you can bring them back and you can leave them with people, and it's gamification still, and, just on a smaller level. Because that's the sort of service we are. I mean, there's plenty of amazing intensive outpatient physiotherapy clinics that have these wonderful robotics suites, and then they're brilliant, and they probably get fantastic outcomes because of the repetitions that you can achieve. But for most people, that's still not accessible, right? It's still early days.
Yeah, no, I think so. And going back to VR, I think that's a relatively inexpensive thing to do. And actually, I think a lot of MSK clinics can learn from that. I think if you're doing upper limb, shoulder, or whatever, I think it could be really interesting. And I suppose it opens you up geographically as well from business and marketing perspective. You don't have to be in a certain location to see a patient. It could be
No,
across the country.
we worked with
Uh,
the Neuro company, and we did a remote trial for someone in Leicester with MS for the system. They sent it out, they posted it out. We did the monitoring remotely. We did the reassessments via Zoom because it was upper limb, so you could get a good idea. But you also had the data coming in anyway, and so I think that's where tech like that is going to sit. And actually, I think with the NHS, like widely adopting something like that, sending someone home from a stroke ward with that for 6 weeks, having been set up and trained on it in the ward
mhm.
would be a great like continuity of rehab.
Yeah, I don't see the NHS getting there, but it's definitely a business idea, whether it's in the neuro side or on the MSK side, but having a central kind of this is what we have. Off the top of my head, you partner with a shit ton of clinics who you approve of. You put your product in the center, you rent the thing, and then you can speak to any one of these clinics that you like anywhere in the country. Little this idea, keep coming up with them. I don't have the time to implement them. Talking of tech, so there's also a lot of nonsense right in the neuro area as well. How do you sort of decide what's clinically reasonable and improves outcomes and doesn't?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think a lot of tech falls into, sometimes there's lots of tech in the MSK sector that people try and repurpose for neuro. Also, I think things get repurposed, which I think is not the right way to go about it. We do a lot of trials. So we will do a lot of trials and thinking around what we're actually buying or recommending. So for us, a lot of it comes down to being highly critical of what you're looking at and actually having a really depth knowledge of your patient group. And I think that's where having a select patient group helps, because if you're getting a bit of tech and you've got multiple different patient groups across your service, it's really difficult to know what to have. And we had Valdin the other day because I was interested, and I know they're predominantly in the MSK market, but I was interested more in their assessment kits and stuff, the dynamometers and force plates and stuff, and how that might implement into our realm, which I think it does. I think it's transferable.
Well, they're very good. And if they're playing sponsorship opportunity, be good, Vald. Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Free stuff.
But
yeah, I also it is interesting because when you are not, because I doubt that you're just purely looking at it again from a commercial and ROI perspective. So that makes it a little bit easier to judge whether a product is going to provide good outcomes, something that you really want. And then I guess the secondary thing is, can we actually afford it, rather than how much money is this going to make us? And it looks really cool. It works ish, but it's going to make us loads of money.
It goes back to that experience. I've always used tech as an added value. So like we invested in our bodyweight treadmill that we have here, and we obviously purchased that. We don't charge anybody extra to use that. We don't charge anyone extra to borrow our FES devices. We could, and there are clinics that do that, but we don't, because we think that actually it's inclusive in you go back to the fees that people are paying, shocking fees onto people left, right, and centre. How annoyed do you get when you buy an airplane ticket and then you have to pay for baggage and then you have to pay for your seat? And actually, it's an added value to your service, and that's why we're quite critical, because we just don't have the money to be throwing at all these things if they're not going to add value.
See, that I think the central lesson actually from this podcast is that many of the things that would shock a business coach and just make them want to scream at you, like, oh my God, you're not charging extra for this, or you're giving free time here, and those really non-commercial things actually turn into incredible marketing. Well, first of all, it provides a great experience. The patient is incredibly happy, which in turn is fantastic marketing, which in turn actually ends up being commercial, rather than the neuro clinic where I turn up and they say, well, it's going to cost this, and then you've thrown this cost and thrown that cost, and I want to have a chat with you for 20 minutes because I'm a bit worried. Well, you need to book an appointment, that's going to cost you money. And it just doesn't kind of deliver the same experience, which again is terrible marketing, and maybe probably makes less money than you do doing it all the right way. So I think it's a central lesson, because too many people, I think, and I'm sometimes guilty of this, of telling people not to do things for free all the bloody time. But I think that lots of people can learn that lesson of do things really well and create a patient experience and generate more money because of it.
I think it's taking. I don't do much on a short term view. Like most of the stuff that I will make a decision on is on a long term view, and I won't learn through mistakes in the past. To be fair, that I don't make decisions on the day. I don't make decisions with people, the rep or whoever's trying to sell me something sat in the room, I will make that decision over then, a period of months rather than immediately on a long-term view. And I think, the conversation we had some time ago when we were redoing our site about SEO, and I had said to you, I think, why should I be putting money into SEO, right? Like, what is it? Why? Because I don't know. Do now, but I didn't at the time. And you had said it's a long-term investment for the health of your site, right? Like to build things organically. And for me, that's really important. And that's how I've always, run our service, is on an organic level and rather than these.
I believe now actually you're number 1 or 2 in every location when you're doing such physio. So it worked out. Yeah, I suppose long-term view is, it's always important. You've got to make sure things work in the short term. You've got to make sure you're financially responsible on things, I guess. Can't just give things away for free. You've got to be commercial at times. But I find it fascinating that you can run a business and probably ultimately charge higher fees, actually, because I think people will pay higher fees for better service. No different to a Four Seasons versus a Premier Inn, right? You're going to pay more for a Four Seasons because of what you're getting from it. But it's kind of interesting because you're also in no way, well, I would not describe you as an entrepreneur. I'd describe you as a secret entrepreneur or someone that's like
probably, yeah.
entrepreneur, because I think you are incredibly entrepreneurial. I think there are so many elements of you and what you've achieved and what you do on a daily basis, which are incredibly entrepreneurial. Nothing that could ever be taught, but you probably never see them in any way as entrepreneurial. I bet you've never described yourself as an entrepreneur to anybody in your life.
No, I'm a physio. I think I said to you at the beginning, like I'm a neuro physio, and ultimately I'm trying to do a good job. And I've been to a few conferences recently, and I spoke to a few the sort of legal case management people. And they said, "Oh, you've got a team of X, and you're here, and how come no one's ever heard of you?" And I was like, "I'm just, I've been doing it for 10 years, but I just haven't had the time because I've been too busy focusing on the people that are in our service, that are using our service." And that is probably not a great message if you're trying to build a business. But when I have time, I use it to do that. But when I don't have time, patience and the service comes first, and then that time to be able to do that is secondary.
Yeah, I spoke to someone maybe a week ago who owns he doesn't want to be named. I wanted to get him on the podcast. He owns a business, a very, very successful business. It's a Savile Row type business. And I was to him and didn't know I was chatting to him. But basically this guy runs the shop. He's in the shop every day. He does all the marketing. He does everything within the business. He's got like a couple of like companies that sort of help him out with bits, bits and pieces. And I said to him, why are you not out there? Why don't you want to do a podcast? He said, because I don't want people to know who I am. I want to be the guy in the shop that sees customers' faces when they look at the product. I want to be the person at the end of the phone where they think they're talking with a customer service rep when they're unhappy, because I want to know that they're unhappy. But I don't want them thinking they're speaking to a founder. And I found that incredibly interesting. He said, I want to turn up at trade shows and be the person that no one recognizes, rather than, oh my God, that's the guy that has millions of pounds and owns, XYZ. And I found that really interesting and quite refreshing in a way.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be this extroverted person to be able to run a successful business and to found something that's truly valuable. I think it all comes back to me for why, right? Like I think like you have to really be close to that and why you did it and why you started it and keep those reasons very clear.
That's very contrary to a lot of what people are doing at the moment. I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Priestley and the 4 Ps, like complete nonsense. But I see it being spattered around the physio community where it's like, be noisy, be shouty, be on social media, post on LinkedIn every day. You're only going to be successful by being the voice of the business and getting out there, which I think is complete nonsense, because actually I think authenticity matters more than anything else. I think quality of what you put out matters more than anything else. Like I put some stuff out there, but I really work hard on making sure that what I put out is really good. And I'd rather have one decent thing than 10 crappy things. And you've got to be authentic with it. So you're right. I don't think it's about being, says me, the guy with a fucking podcast and always shouting. But I don't think you do need to be an extrovert. I don't think you do need to be loud and whatever to be successful in business. I think if you understand the business from the inside, you know what you're doing, you understand the customers, the patients, and deliver a great experience, I almost feel like you can't fail.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are decisions that I've made historically which could have gone either way. Like I think there's like decisions there where you're like, just pre-COVID, we were looking at renting a space, And it was fortunately, it was on my, it's a credit to my wife. She said, listen, Adam, I really don't think that this is the best time to be doing it. And then literally 3 months later, it was a lockdown. And we'd have been
Yeah.
locked into some sort of rental agreement that would probably have we'd have probably gone under. So, there is periods where you've made those decisions and you're lucky or you're not, in some ways. And that's a coin toss decision in some ways, isn't it? You could have gone either way. So I think there is a bit of that. But I do think that authenticity sits at the center of what you do. As a healthcare, you're in a healthcare business. You're not you're not working in Canary Wharf. It's different. It's,
Yeah, no, I agree. I was on a podcast recently where someone said, Michael, honestly, you're incredible. What you've achieved, you sold the business, you've got this money, and you've got this. I was like, mate, just stop there. Like, number one, 50% of everything is luck. The rest of it is just hard work. And the amount of things that could have sent us under a million times, the people that I met at the right times, you can't take. In the same way, you can't beat yourself up when things go wrong. You also can't sit there and go pat yourself on the back going, oh my God, aren't I wonderful? Look how successful my business is. I think you've got to accept that a very small portion of that is down to you. The rest is luck, other people, relationships, and so on, and timing a lot of the time as well, right?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting point. Listen, let's leave it there because we've been on for almost an hour.
Wow.
I'm sure you patients to treat for free.
Probably.
It's been really lovely chatting. I hope everyone finds it really useful. So thanks for
your time. That's been great.
Cheers, Adam.
Bye.